The webinar started streaming live on YouTube. Okay, now that we covered the tech part, it's time to start the webinar. I would like to introduce our opening speaker, Marge. Marge is one of the coordinator of the International Campaign for Women's Right to Safe Abortion. She will be talking about the background around our struggles with abortion and access for it for teenagers and how have the states historically responded. She will also be touching upon telemedicine. Welcome, Marge, over to you.
Thank you. I would like to open today with a personal anecdote. When I was about 16 years old, my mother told me that I should never have sex before marriage. But in the next sentence, she also said, if you ever get pregnant, come to me, I'll help you get an abortion. That was the only education I ever received about sex and abortion. Today, I want to give an overview of what's been published on the subject of adolescence and abortion. There are literally thousands of published papers from the last 30 to 40 years on the website PubMed, yet it is often believed that only the current generation who discovered sex before the age of 18. If you think that's true, talk to your mothers and grandmothers is all I can tell you. In fact, since data have been recorded, there have been a high proportion of abortions in the adolescent age group in all world regions, though rates of sexual experience do go up and down to some extent. There are high rates of unwanted sex as well, as high as 25% in adolescents. We must ask who the partner was, because sexual abuse is common, including by family members. Rape is common. Teachers and employers may demand sex. Sex may be exchanged for small amounts of money. And then there are the boyfriends, mostly the girl's age or a few years older, with whom she actually wants to have consensual sex and enjoy it. Many countries require parental consent for abortion, which often acts as a barrier, not as protection, and leads girls to travel away from home to avoid family involvement and or to seek an unsafe abortion because, ironically, it may be more confidential. But girls often mention the isolation of seeking an abortion without any support and often not knowing where to find help. Online access to medical abortion pills and to information and advice have opened up new spaces for girls to have safe abortions. But use of MA pills at home may be problematic for girls who are still living with their parents or families, or, for example, in a refugee camp. Laws may also help or hurt. Criminalization of sex under the age of consent, usually ages 18 to 14, means that even consensual sex is illegal and must be reported to the police by a health professional who is approached for an abortion. That can often lead to the boy, mostly, being arrested. The role of mothers, sisters, and friends are very important. Some may insist on abortion, some may refuse to allow it, but others help and support their daughters, as do sisters and friends, and the growing number of helplines for accompaniment of an abortion by phone or internet. Child marriage also has a major effect on law and practice and on access to safe abortion. Children as young as the age of 8 may be able to get pregnant, and then doctors fear abortion is unsafe, especially because they are often approached only after the pregnancy is well advanced. Hence, these girls are often forced to carry the pregnancy to term, which is certainly not safer than an abortion. But in fact, at some point in the late second trimester, both abortion and pregnancy are unsafe in a child, especially with an unskilled provider or health professional. So I'm going to stop here. I haven't even mentioned contraceptives and condoms, let alone the feelings of girls themselves about sex and relationships very much. However, I can close by saying that the need for safe abortion for adolescent girls needs a lot more positive attention and support. Thank you.
Thank you, Marge. I find it very interesting that Marge pointed out that parental concerns become a barrier most of the time than a protection. Even in India, many times the laws end up, and the laws they are supposed to protect the children end up doing more harm to them than protection. I would like to welcome our next speaker. Our next speaker is Maravik Pakron. She likes to be called by her nickname Bing. Bing is the Executive Director of Women's Global Network for Reproductive Rights. She will be talking about the situation of young people in the Philippines and regions with restricted access, and how activists on ground have responded to it, and how teenagers are responding to the restrictive laws. Welcome, Bing. Over to you.
Thank you, Athira. Thank you, Hidden Pockets, for this opportunity. And good evening from the Philippines, and good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world right now. Our topic, our title right now actually talks about the Netflix generation. And just before I start my intervention about what's going on in the Philippines, I also like to underscore the fact that while indeed Netflix offers content that normalize abortion, Netflix is still largely a domain of the privileged teenagers in my context, along with the fact that internet is a privilege because of the lack of access to the technology largely by the marginalized. And so, having said that, rights-based and accurate information and SRHR and services as well is not accessible. And therefore, the normalization of sex amongst teenagers and abortions, such as in how it is depicted in the Dear White People or sex education, are still not accessible to many. And so in my context in the Philippines, where teenage pregnancy has been declared by the government as a national social emergency. Yes, it is a national social emergency. And adolescents, teenagers face many tremendous legal, social, and political barriers to accessing SRHR information and services, putting them at the higher risk of unplanned pregnancy, unsafe abortion, sexually transmitted infections, and HIV and other health and development challenges. Abortion in the Philippines is highly restricted. We are one of the 6 countries in the world where abortion is totally prohibited. It's totally prohibited. The law is ambiguous. The law does not include any exception, including to save the life of the woman, of the pregnant person, or to protect her health. So anybody or any person, any pregnant person who undergoes an abortion for any reason may be punished with imprisonment for up to 6 years. So imagine this. In the Philippines, 3 women die each day due to unsafe abortion. Every day, almost 300 women are hospitalized due to unsafe abortion complications. And I say women because that already also includes girls. And I mentioned as well that teenage pregnancy is a national social emergency in the Philippines, where approximately from the age of 10 to 19 years old, there is 537 teenagers each day that gets pregnant. So that's about how many in each hour. And 1 in 5 teenage person has repeat pregnancy during her teen years, and that's a level that remained unchanged in the past 2 decades. Half of every pregnant teenagers have an unintended pregnancy, and 1 in 10 have attempted to have an abortion. We, of course, like many others, we have a lot of laws governing women's rights, ensuring women's rights, including the reproductive health law that we fought for so many years as feminists and women's rights workers in the Philippines. And this law that guarantees comprehensive sexuality education in the Philippines and services. We also have other laws such as Magna Carta of Women, that is the domestication of the Philippine commitments to women's rights. However, still, we don't have a law that covers access to safe abortion services. And even the RPRH law that guarantees sexuality education, it is not compulsory to private schools that is largely run by the religious organizations, and it doesn't cover topics around abortion. Not only that the information in sexuality education is lacking, the rollout of the sexuality education for the last 6 years has been delayed due to the opposition of the religious sectors. And minors are not able to access SRH or information and services because of this. SRH services are guaranteed for the teenagers, are also guaranteed under the RPRH law. However, below 18 years old, you cannot access without parental consent. Teenage mothers may access family planning services in public health facilities or any facility for that matter. But because teenage pregnancy is also highly stigmatized, most teenage mothers don't access the services. And because abortion is actually not being talked about openly, even in the recent past in the Philippines, and we talked it in a small voice, in a hush-hush manner, there is a dearth of data when it comes to abortion in the Philippines. It is hard to capture, the stories, the data, and there is that report from the Center for Reproductive Rights, Forsaken Lives, the harmful impact of the Philippine criminal abortion ban. They documented cases of unsafe abortion among young women, and one of them is Maricel. She was 18 years old and had already had a child when she died of severe infection after self-inducing an abortion using 3 different unsafe methods. She died on the operating table as a result of sepsis. Another is Shallow. She is 16 years old who became pregnant after rape. So again, like I said, teenage pregnancy is a national social emergency, and teenage pregnancy is also being caused by a lot of other factors, including sexual violence. And Shallow was raped, and she went to a hilot. We call it a hilot, a masseuse. So she had her abdominal massage, and then she bled profusely until she went to the hospital and refused of care in the pretext of that she doesn't have any money. And during our pre-pandemic FGDs among young people in Metro Manila, stories of unsafe abortion among young people are unimaginable. So the practices are just very dangerous. Like, for example, kicking in the hip to end a pregnancy, or drinking bitter herbs, concoction, and other concoctions to end the pregnancy, and taking cytotec, which is misoprostol, against the correct dosage. And of course, we know for a fact that the pandemic has exacerbated the situation, and even the Philippine government have already mentioned that there would be around 20,000 more teenage pregnancies that happened in 2020 as an direct impact of the pandemic. And of course, without access to safe abortion, many teenagers like Maricel and Shello would eventually end their pregnancy unsafely, risking their lives and health, and have ended in the statistics of the estimated number of maternal deaths due to the disruption caused by the COVID-19 and among other factors.
Think you have 1 more minute.
Yes, I'm into that. So we are, yes, of course, challenging the situation. We are not the feminists, and there is the growing activism in the country right now, challenging and wanting to overturn the unsafe abortion that impacts thousands of lives. And we have seen a huge number of participation of young people campaigning to challenge the legal restrictions to abortion and making sure that abortion services are recognized as healthcare and as a public health issue. And last year, we nationally launched a decriminalization of abortion campaign through a feminist-led proposed legislation on the decriminalization that would ensure access to all pregnant Filipino women, girls, and persons of diverse identities to access comprehensive health care, including repealing the discriminatory laws and existing legal restrictions on abortion. And we are there. We are still here, and we are fighting for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Bing. The data you shared, the statistics, it's really disturbing, and the stories also. So if participants, anybody have any questions to ask to Bing, please put them in the chat box. Or if you would like to ask directly, after all the panelists have done, please ask to unmute and we will unmute you to ask the questions. So now it's time to welcome our third speaker, Camila. Camila is from Argentina. She will be talking about the role of young people in actually bringing the change in laws, which are pretty progressive, and how young people want more changes in these laws around access to abortion. Camila will be speaking in Spanish. English interpretation will be available. If you prefer to listen in Spanish, please stick on to the original audio. If you prefer to listen in English, please choose English from the interpretation. Over to you, Camila.
Hola, buen día. Me avisan si se escucha, por favor. Bien, perfecto. Bueno, buen día acá, porque en realidad para nosotros y nosotras acá es de mañana, pero buenas tardes para quienes estén en otros hemisferios. Primero que nada, agradecerles un montón por la invitación al webinar. Es un orgullo poder participar y compartir este rato con grandes mujeres activistas de diferentes partes del mundo, todas trabajando por el acceso a nuestros derechos y la garantía de nuestros derechos. En este caso, a mí me gustaría charlar un poco sobre el rol tan determinante que tuvo la juventud y el activismo de la juventud en Argentina con la reciente aprobación de la Ley de Interrupción Voluntaria del Embarazo en diciembre del año 2019. Para ponerlas en contexto, seguramente muchos de ustedes conocen la campaña nacional por el derecho al aborto legal, seguro y gratuito, a la que le estoy haciendo alusión, poniéndome los aros, porque si hay algo que hicimos las jóvenes fue hacer de nuestra militancia por el aborto legal, seguro y gratuito, algo que llevábamos a todos lados. Y entre eso incluía, bueno, el merchandising, la vestimenta, el glitter en la cara. Fue una batalla cultural que ganamos con mucha alegría en las calles. Y quería hablar un poco sobre la campaña nacional por el derecho al aborto legal, seguro y gratuito, porque es verdaderamente la protagonista de la posibilidad de que hoy en Argentina las mujeres estemos un poquito más cerca de la igualdad entre los géneros, las mujeres y los cuerpos con la posibilidad de gestar. La campaña nacional por el derecho al aborto legal, seguro y gratuito es una campaña con más de 15 años en Argentina, en la que participamos activamente más de 3 generaciones de mujeres. Claramente que mi generación fue la que tuvo la posibilidad de formar parte de la coyuntura que vio una Argentina sin aborto legal y una Argentina con aborto legal. Una Argentina que tenía que trabajar en red con compañeras y compañeros de diferentes lugares de la Argentina para ver de qué manera conseguíamos misoprostol o un aborto seguro, que seguramente no iba a ser gratuito, pero trabajábamos desde la clandestinidad para poder garantizar nuestras elecciones. Y pudimos ver una Argentina, la actual, en la que estamos al alcance de 2 clics para poder sacar un turno y acceder a un aborto seguro. Entonces, la verdad es que me siento una privilegiada de haber formado parte de esta generación que vio esa transformación. Y como en América Latina y en Argentina fundamentalmente, los movimientos de las juventudes están alineados completamente al movimiento estudiantil, quisiera hablarles más que nada desde esa perspectiva, porque a mí me toca ser referente universitaria y feminista, entonces tengo esa posibilidad de hablarles desde ese lugar. En Argentina tenemos una larga tradición del movimiento de la juventud unido al movimiento estudiantil, porque es de la reforma universitaria que se dio en Córdoba, un fenómeno que se proyecta en la región latinoamericana, como también se dio en Chile recientemente. En Chile están en un proceso de reforma constitucional bastante profundo, y fueron las estudiantes feministas las que un día decidieron saltar los molinetes del metro en Santiago, y hoy están en un proceso de reforma constitucional que está haciendo, que es un hecho, y esto en Chile está pasando hace unos pocos años nada más. Entonces, ese es un poco nuestro contexto y nuestra posibilidad en la región. Y la campaña nacional por el derecho al aborto legal, seguro y gratuito tuvo algunas otras herramientas de militancia cuando en el año 2015 en Argentina, en junio del 2015, el fenómeno de Ni Una Menos, que también fue un fenómeno que se proyectó a nivel regional. Ni Una Menos, como bien lo indica su eslogan, lo que plantea es que es una lucha para que las mujeres dejemos de morir en manos del patriarcado, en manos del machismo. En junio del 2015, una chica de 14 años en una provincia argentina, la provincia de Santa Fe, sufrió un femicidio y fue encontrada en el patio de la casa de su pareja hasta el momento, y ese fue una especie de detonante que hizo que el feminismo llegara a cada uno de los ámbitos y a cada uno de los rincones de las discusiones sociales. Habilitó la agenda para que pudiésemos hablar en todos los ámbitos a los que íbamos sobre nuestros derechos como mujeres, sobre nuestros derechos como disidencias sexuales, y que pudiésemos plantear que necesitábamos dejar de morir. Entonces, en ese contexto, hablar de aborto se presentó de otra manera, porque lo que se plantea desde la campaña nacional y lo que se planteó siempre desde la campaña nacional por el derecho al aborto legal, seguro y gratuito, es plantear el aborto como una política pública, como el hecho de que el aborto, al margen de las concepciones que existan, ¿no? las que son más morales, que en América Latina el cristianismo tiene una gran influencia, el cristianismo plantea la vida desde la concepción, y la biología plantea otra cosa, pero acá el punto era discutir el aborto como una política pública, y discutirlo como una política pública era pensarlo como el aborto pasó, pasa y va a seguir sucediendo, porque la fuerza de las mujeres y de los cuerpos con la capacidad de gestar es mucho más grande que cualquier imposición normativa que nos pusieran en el país. Entonces, el punto era sacarnos de la clandestinidad. Sacarnos de la clandestinidad implicaba incorporarnos en un sistema de aborto legal y seguro y gratuito, porque no todas las mujeres o las personas con la capacidad de gestar podían acceder al mismo tipo de aborto cuando se trataba de clandestinidad. Seguramente aquellas personas con algunos recursos intelectuales y algunos recursos materiales mayores iban a poder acceder probablemente a un aborto un poco más seguro que mujeres. Entonces nos encontrábamos también en la disyuntiva de no vulnerar más a nuestra población que no corría con los mismos privilegios que otros sectores. Eso fue lo que nos dio el aborto legal, seguro y gratuito. No, no solamente nos acerca hoy un poco más a las jóvenes que le pusimos el cuerpo, ¿no? Nos dio la posibilidad de encontrar otras formas de lucha, porque fuimos las jóvenes las que a partir del 2015, y yo que empecé a estudiar en el año 2013, pude ver ese cambio, otro privilegio, porque pude ver cómo la militancia del feminismo funcionaba de una manera hasta el año 2015, y a partir del año 2015 funcionó de otra manera, con convocatorias masivas en simultáneo, federales, en todas las grandes ciudades de la Argentina, donde cientos y cientos de mujeres y personas con la capacidad de gestar, y compañeros y compañeras de los colectivos de diversidades sexuales, nos encontrábamos en puntos neurálgicos de las ciudades, y con nuestras insignias verdes, con nuestros pañuelos verdes, hacíamos pañuelazos, convocábamos a nuestros compañeros y compañeras en las redes, y los pañuelazos llegaron a todos lados, fuimos noticia mundial gracias a esos pañuelazos. Y lo digo y lo cuento como algo que realmente nos atravesó en el cuerpo, porque la juventud le pusimos el cuerpo porque podíamos, pero en una campaña institucionalizada, con más de 15 años de historia, hay que reconocer que hubieron muchas mujeres que nos permitieron a las jóvenes vivir este momento y pensar un futuro con aborto legal y seguro y gratuito. Y desde el año 1983, con el primer proyecto de despenalización de
Kamla,
aborto,
you have 1 more minute.
ya termino, gracias, que presentó Flor y un montón de mujeres que nos permitieron llegar hasta ese momento. Hoy las jóvenes podemos saber que vamos a acceder a un aborto legal seguro. Nuestra ley, que es la 27.610 de interrupción voluntaria del embarazo, plantea que se pueda acceder al aborto hasta la semana 14, y las personas de hasta 13 años pueden acceder sin un consentimiento de un tutor o un mayor. Pero todavía quedan algunos desafíos, ¿no? Que es garantizar la educación sexual integral en todas las escuelas y en todos los ámbitos. Todavía eso es un desafío, y la posibilidad de que se elimine la objeción de algo que también tiene esta ley que se aprobó. que fue un argumento para poder aprobarlo, pero que entendemos que es perfectible en ese sentido la ley. Así que bueno, agradecerles mucho y quedar a entera disposición para que cada vez seamos más quienes podamos vivir un aborto legal, seguro y gratuito. Gracias.
Thank you, Camila. We have put a poll whether you have a law in your country that restricts abortion for adolescents. Majority of the people, 65% of the people responded saying they have a law that restricts abortion for adolescents. And 35% of people said, no, we can bring this into discussion. Right now, I'm going to our next speaker. I'd like to welcome Aisha Lovely George from Hidden Pockets Collective. Aisha is the executive coordinator of Hidden Pockets Collective, and we'll be talking about India's medical termination of pregnancy law and how teenagers had to struggle during COVID times and how their situation became a lot more serious. Welcome, Aisha. Over to you.
Thank you, Adira. Good evening, everyone. I hope everyone is safe and doing well. So today I would be speaking about MTP Act, that is the Medical Termination of Pregnancy Act 1971 in India, about teenagers' struggle during COVID, and also a bit on what Hidden Pockets Collective believes can be helpful for young people who are below 18, which the law is not helpful at all. So our law, which provides for safe abortion, the MTP Act, is 50 years old, and still majority of the women don't know about it. And I'm talking about women who are highly educated and economically well off. So many of them don't know that this law exists. And now recently we had few amendments, and I'm sure that many of the doctors who they don't know about this law, and if they know also, they might not implement it during their service. So there are few good amendments and there are few which still need discussions. The good ones are that after 50 years, now even unmarried women can access safe abortion. Before it was only married women if it was in the case of failure of contraception, but now even unmarried women can go access. And before, between 12 weeks to 20 weeks, 2 doctors were needed, but now only 1 doctor is needed. And confidentiality is given importance. So the registered medical practitioner cannot reveal anything about the person who has come to access safe abortion. So these are a few things which have improved. But when we're talking about adolescents and teenagers, I would say only the adolescents who come in the age bracket of 18 to 19 can access safe abortion. And the ones who are below 18 are still in a lot of trouble while accessing safe abortion. So the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare tells that about 22% of India's population comprises of the age between 10 to 19. And the Population Foundation of India found that only 10% of this population uses contraceptive. So we can believe that only 10% of this population is sexually active and they are safe because they're using contraceptive. What are this 90% young people doing? We can believe that they are not involved in sexual activities. They are studying, they are playing, but not involved in sexual activities. In India, Indians believe that sexual activities should be explored only after marriage. And Indian law says that you can marry only after 18. For women, it's 18. For men, it's 21. We all have crossed that age of 15, 16, 17. And we all know that the body does not understand any law. Your hormones don't follow any law. And we are talking here about adolescents who are going through hormonal changes, peer pressure, and confusion. They want to explore and experiment. They have access to smartphones, access to varieties of information. And we all know that to be on social media, you have to be just 13 and you can have an account there. In this age, when you're adolescent, you're not bothered about the laws, but you are more bothered about being accepted by your peers and, to know what your peers think about you. If we still believe that adolescents don't get involved in sexual activities, then I think we are running far away from truth. And COVID made it worse for adolescents. This is the time where adolescents lost social support, emotional support, and were surrounded with anxiety, fear, stress, and depression. Because the movement was restricted, even now in few states in India, the movement is restricted. Many of them could not go out and share it to their friends or anyone or seek any help. And in India, everything has come to online spaces. I mean, even in schools, children are forced to sit online 24 hours, study there. But we all know that what's happening. When we are online, we access a lot of information. And we also know that online, there are a pool of information there, and we don't know what is right and wrong. We also had a case where we were conducting a workshop with the picker community, and the women told us that my girl child will surely run off from home and will get pregnant. I can't handle it. So it's better to make her married now. And she is not 18 or above 18. But to protect my girl child, it's better to make her marry so that I don't have to go through that humiliation in my society. And also during COVID and even now, we had few cases where these young people who are below 18 did not know what to do. A case where a girl was 4 weeks pregnant, was asked by a doctor to hold on because COVID patients were more important than giving her safe access to safe abortion. Few of them were unsure whether they are pregnant or not. And because there was a restriction in going and accessing pregnancy kit also, they did not know how to go, how to ask permission from their parents to go and access these kits. And the stigma has increased. We had an instance where I had an experience where a doctor asked me during this COVID, you're still supporting abortion. These young people who are getting involved in sexual activities should be punished because COVID is real, and during this time, nobody should get involved in sexual activities. And we all know that sexual activities is not planned according to COVID. And we also have few laws with us which are very confusing, which actually does not allow young people to access safe spaces. For example, we have the Protection of Children from Sexual Offences Act 2012, where there's something called the mandatory reporting, where if a service provider gets to know somebody has come for safe abortion is below 18, then they have to report the case to the appropriate authorities. And this makes it very difficult for the service provider also, because during COVID, nobody wants to get involved with police. I mean, everybody wants to be in a safer space with no involvement of police. So most of them would say we will not take any case which is below 18. Even the MTP Act, that makes it very difficult, because if you're below 18, you need to get a guardian with you. You can't go alone. So for a young person who is below 18 to access and figure out a guardian is very difficult. And when they get to know about such things that they have to go and get a guardian, they just figure out other ways to access safe abortion, and which can be really unsafe and might have more sad consequences. So I believe scaring adolescents with laws won't help in improving their health. They don't know about the law actually. And many of them come to know when they are in trouble. Only when they are in trouble, they get to know there's something called MTP, there's something called POXO. Before that, nobody knows that some laws exist. Even when we were 16 or 17, I'm sure most of us did not know the laws which are existing in our country. And we all understand that laws are very confusing. And imagine for a 16-year-old child what this law will sound like. It took 50 years for our law to include married women and provide access to safe abortion. And you can imagine how much time it will take for the law to include something and provide something useful for the adolescents. Should we wait till the lawmakers decide something, or should we do something about it? Hidden Pockets Collective believes in alternatives. We need to be there where adolescents are already present. And if we believe it or not, they are present online. Like I said, all of them, most of them have access to smartphones. In India, we can buy smartphones at a very cheap rates. So most of them are present there. So we need to be there so that we can provide them accurate information about sexual and reproductive health and rights, so that it's not that they get to know about the law when they're in trouble, but they are already equipped with law and knowledge beforehand.
Aisha, you have 1 more minute.
Okay, thank you, Jasmine. So we believe in creating mainstream music albums, videos, audio podcasts, and reaching this population. Right now, we are creating a music video, where we are talking about information related to safe access to safe abortion. And I'm sure that someone who is below 18 will one day access this thing and would be listening to it, because there's no control on online spaces who can listen to what. We need to support adolescents through our creativity. Laws will take its own time to solve the confusion between MTP Act, POXO. So it will take some time. So we are the only hope for adolescents. And I think high time we use creativity to help adolescents. Thank you.
Thank you, Aisha. You bring up a lot of interesting points. It took 50 years for India to understand that unmarried people also have sex. It's very interesting. And I'd like to welcome our last speaker for today, Payal Shah. Payal Shah will be concluding the speaker's points and bring a common thread around it. She's an international human rights lawyer focusing on sexual and reproductive health and rights. She will also be talking about whether these laws are enough, or do we need alternative approaches to access abortion for teenagers? Over to you, Payal.
Thank you. Thank you to Hidden Pockets for the invitation to speak today. I'm in a really lucky position to be able to reflect on the rich insights shared by the speakers before me from a range of contexts, really underscoring the diversity of experiences, the fact that adolescents are not a monolith and that there may be different needs for different adolescents, but also really highlighting this common thread, the ways in which the laws are really not responsive to the Netflix generation. This doesn't just mean laws that regulate abortion. It also includes, I think, as the speakers have highlighted, laws such as those establishing a minimum legal age of sexual consent that doesn't recognize consensual sex for adolescents at any age, or laws perhaps related to child early and forced marriage, which might actually end up criminalizing adolescents themselves if they find themselves in marriages or enter marriages below the minimum legal age of marriage. We see, for example, that laws that impose criminal penalties on adolescents who have sex or are married, this can create a chilling effect on access to healthcare. We see the same thing with laws that on child sexual offenses, which mandate reporting for sex below the age of 18 by healthcare providers, which can lead to adolescents not wanting to seek reproductive healthcare because they fear being reported to the police under laws such as POXO, like Aisha just discussed. These laws, reflect a really common tension and a common thread, which is the tension between empowerment for adolescents and protection on the other hand. Often we're seeing responses prioritizing protection at the expense of empowerment, at the expense of rights. And this is leading to really clear violations of rights, as well as the invisibilization of adolescents themselves. For example, in response to higher rates of adolescent pregnancy or teenage pregnancy in the Philippines as being highlighted, the response is very rarely to focus on adolescents themselves, but rather to focus on things such as prosecutions or punishing the person who was involved in the sex with the girl, but not really thinking about what an adolescent themselves might need in this context. The response is rarely to scale up comprehensive sexuality education, to ensure access to adolescent-friendly sexual and reproductive health services, or to remove legal barriers such as parental consent. And we have to ask ourselves, why is this? What is causing this? As I was listening to my fellow panelists, I was really struck that this is really rooted in gendered and age-based stereotypes and social norms. That young people all over the world, they are a very tightly controlled group, and they're a very stereotyped group. As Aisha mentioned, there's social norms really placing adolescents, girls' value in their virginity and their chastity. There's a denial of sexuality as a normal part of adolescent development, but especially adolescent girls' development. These norms combine with other gendered stereotypes of women and girls as irrational, as weak, as incapable of making decisions over their own bodies. And they lead to these presumptions that sex outside of marriage must always be non-consensual and therefore should be prohibited. They combine with stereotypes about women and girls' natural roles as mothers and that being their primary value in society to lead to abortion laws that prohibit access to abortion, that make pregnancy, continuation of pregnancy, the default, even though, for example, as Marge highlighted, continuation of pregnancy for girls can often be as risky as an abortion, or perhaps even more so, depending on the earlier stages. This is all really contrary to public health evidence. And so we have to think about how we're going to dismantle these stereotypes and the role that these stereotypes play in shaping these laws. As Aisha pointed out, and I was really struck by this, your body does not follow any law. Hormones do not follow law. I would say adolescent development doesn't follow the laws. In fact, laws should be reflective of these realities. And that is the problem that we're seeing. So taking a step back and thinking about empowerment approaches to laws for teenagers and adolescents, I think international human rights law can be really instructive because it recognizes the obligation of states not only to provide access to services, not only to reform laws, but also to address the discriminatory stereotypes that are under these laws. The Committee on the Rights of the Child, for example, at the UN, has recognized that there needs to be a balance between protectionist and enabling frameworks. In assessing this balance between protection and empowerment, the Committee on the Rights of the Child has emphasized the need to ensure measures intended to protect adolescents' sexual and reproductive health and rights are enabling rather than punitive. The CRC, the Committee on the Rights of the Child, has urged states to ensure that adolescents are not criminalized for what is factually consensual sex, and that states have obligations not just to prevent sexual violence, to provide rehabilitation and redress and prosecute offenders, but actually they also have an obligation to ensure that efforts to protect adolescents do not lead to barriers to sexual and reproductive health or to other harms. Interestingly, the CRC was one of the first human rights bodies to very clearly call for the decriminalization of abortion in all circumstances and to clearly articulate state obligations to decriminalize abortion. They've recognized adolescent sexual and reproductive health as a right, and that with regards to abortion, states must eliminate requirements of third-party consent, meaning consent from parents or from courts or others. And they've called on governments to review legislation with a view of guaranteeing the best interests of pregnant adolescents and ensuring that the views of adolescents are always heard and respected in abortion-related decisions. They've talked about adolescent evolving capacity and that this should actually lead to a legal presumption in the law that when an adolescent comes to seek sexual and reproductive health care, that they are able to consent on their own behalf. This shifts the burden for providers to prove why they're actually denying services, rather than the default being that they deny services unless there's some exception. And this is very important. It also, human rights also emphasizes that, the points I think many have made here, that it's not enough to have the laws. Many countries have laws on paper that are positive around adolescent rights. I think Camilla has mentioned that the next step in Argentina is going to be pushing forward for implementation of the law and the steps that are needed. We have to recognize and address the stereotypes and norms that lead to adolescents seeking sexual and reproductive health services, including abortion, being treated with suspicion and stigma. This is not just unique to abortion, frankly. I remember I was one of the researchers on the Forsaken Lives report that being mentioned, and I remember interviewing adolescents who had given birth in a health facility. And even those adolescents were saying that when they went in to deliver, they were in labor, they were being harassed by the providers and, told that you had your fun, now you deserve to suffer. And really, almost being made to be punished for the fact that they engaged in sex, which is so problematic and we need to address. UN human rights law, recognizes that states must take affirmative measures to eradicate these social barriers in terms of norms or beliefs that prevent girls or adolescents from autonomously exercising their right to sexual and reproductive health. And a critical aspect of this is sexuality education. I think every panelist here has mentioned sexuality education, and this is not just in school, but also out of school. There's a really critical role that and governments are really obligated to ensure sexuality education online, in person, in school settings, but also outside. And I think, Aisha, your call for us to be creative is not just one for activists. It's actually one that governments are obligated to heed, that we need to think in this time of COVID about how we're going to reach populations and how we're going to address the the stereotypes, the taboos, the unequal power dynamics, which lead to harm. And finally, I'm just going to conclude with a point on participation. And I think, Camilla, you really highlighted so clearly, that participation is such a clear and important aspect of abortion law reform, but also to ensure that when we are advocating for reform, we're not missing the marginalized groups that truly face the most significant harm under restrictive laws. And I think, Aisha, as you mentioned, even with recent reform to the MTP Act in India, I think it's very easy for parental consent requirements and things like that to be seen as a compromise that's acceptable by governments. The governments often feel like, oh, this is something we can concede, and we have to jump up and down and really show why this is so problematic. And the stereotypes that underlie this need to be challenged. So I think I'll end there, but just to say that I think it's interesting as we look across human rights law to think, are our governments really holding on to these and implementing these guarantees? And if they're not, how can we really advocate to ensure that they move forward in the right direction?
Thank you, Payal. We will have a poll right now. Please do answer the poll. We have also got some questions from the participants. I will be redirecting that to the panelists. You can answer the poll. I will share the questions with panelists. First question is for Camila. Camila, there's a question. Can you share Argentina's advocacy approach in making safe abortion services accessible to adolescents?
Sí, claro. En Argentina, desde que aprovecho para corregirme, que hace un rato dije 2019 era año 2020, pasa que el 2020 pasó como un cúmulo de días por la pandemia para mí. Pero el abordaje que se hace en realidad es tanto desde el servicio de salud pública como de salud de obras sociales, se puede acceder mediante protocolos. Existe la objeción de conciencia que plantea nuestra norma vigente de aborto legal, que lo que quiere decir es que si algún prestador de salud no quiere practicar el aborto, tiene que derivar en el lapso de máximo 10 días. Porque el aborto se puede hacer hasta la semana 14, entonces el tiempo en ese sentido se vuelve algo muy importante a la hora de gestionarlo. En el caso de las personas, de los adolescentes y de las adolescentes, pueden, a partir de los 13 años en adelante, acceder sin el consentimiento ni el acompañamiento de ningún mayor. En el caso de que sean menores, sí tiene que acompañar un tutor y firmar un consentimiento en todos los casos. Y ese es uno de los aspectos en los que creemos que la ley es perfectible, sobre todo para las niñas. Tenemos siempre muchos casos de niñas embarazadas a partir de los 11 años. Entonces creemos que ahí tenemos un rango de edad en el que necesitamos mejorar. Pero es un trámite bastante simple. Afortunadamente se puede hacer mediante conexión virtual en el caso de las obras sociales y en el caso de acercarse a un hospital o una clínica o una institución de salud.
Thank you, Camila. There is another question that's for Bing. Being in a country where abortion is illegal, how are you able to talk about decriminalization?
Yeah, so it is indeed illegal, but that is pertaining to the actual service. As I mentioned earlier, anybody who's thought to have an abortion, or the person who assists to the pregnant person to have an abortion, is going to get jailed up to 6 years, from 2 years up to 6 years. But talking about decriminalization of abortion and advocating against the discriminatory law on abortion in the Philippines is not illegal, because what we do with the Philippine Safe Abortion Advocacy Network is that we're calling for the repeal of the discriminatory laws and existing legal restrictions, that we say that this actually will address the unsafe abortions from happening, and that it is in fact unsafe abortion is a public health emergency issue. As I mentioned earlier, 3 women die each day due to unsafe abortion. So we bring into that level of discourse in the Philippines, where everyone can understand. Nobody wants to have someone die. And so that kind of thinking, we also, of course, bank into that kind of thinking, of the protectionist kind of thinking, that nobody should, one is too many when it comes to violence, when it comes to discrimination. And we are also, asserting the penal provision of the national law on the Magna Carta of Women, that provisions that says that any discriminatory laws against women should be repealed. And we assert that to the Philippine government, that the penal provision on abortion should be repealed. And among others, we are also calling for and demanding compliance to the government's obligation to international human rights mechanisms that it signed on to. And we have a lot of that. CEDAW have already have an opinion and a recommendation to the Philippines to decriminalize abortion over and over for the last decade already. So we are pushing for the human rights standards. We are pushing for what is also available within our the legal system, which in fact we already have under the Magna Carta of Women.
Thank you, Bing. There is another question that is asked for all the panelists. Anybody can answer. How do you work towards advocating against the parental consent when there are social and cultural norms? And what should be the lower age of consent for a minor, bearing in mind the information the minor has, ability to make a decision, and the access to safe and affordable abortion? This question is for all the panelists. Anybody can answer.
I can jump in a bit. I think that Marge really highlighted where the evidence is, right? And that there is a significant amount of public health evidence that shows that parental consent is not actually helpful in leading to positive outcomes, and rather leads to harm. It creates a chilling effect on access to services. It leads to adolescent girls or adolescents needing to ending up seeking abortions through through other channels, and maybe would be their priority or their ideal choice. And so I think that this is one very important argument, is to show that it actually is not effective in improving health for adolescents, and that actually it ends up ultimately violating rights. And so I think there's obviously like a legal argument around autonomy that I think one could make, but I think as an advocate, the health arguments here are often most persuasive because they are so clear. The way in which it leads to harm is so significant, and international human rights law does recognize that. They say not just consent, but actually also notification requirements, which is an issue in some parts of the world, is also a violation of rights.
Thank you, Payal. Anyone else wanted to add something to that?
I can say something if you like. I think this question is similar to the question of why does the law have to regulate abortion for women who are adults? And I think the whole nature of regulation of both women and girls, and it comes from the same, you can call it patriarchal, that my generation spent a lot of time moaning about patriarchal laws and policies, but they aren't just laws and policies, they're cultural, they're familial, ways of seeing other people and believing that they always need help from somebody who knows more, whether it's a doctor or a lawyer or a parliament or a religious figure, that their behavior and their lives need to be regulated. And I think this is the French have the notion that we have to claim citizenship. And the gender equality movement in France is very strong on this subject, that we are seen as second-class citizens, both young people and women who don't have full citizenship. And that applies across many other political situations as well. It has ethnic reflections, race reflections, nationality reflection, all sorts of things where some people are seen as first-class citizens and nobody else. And the nobody else people have to be regulated, watched, etc. And I think this is a long-term battle, cultural battle, as well as a legal one, a religious one, and a familial one. Starts in the family. And so I think there's no question why it's there. The real problem is getting rid of it. And I suppose what has to happen is that as the women's movement has stood up and said, sorry, we can stand on our own feet and we want laws that give us the right to choose, young women and adolescents need to do the same. And young people in general need to do the same and prove publicly that they actually are capable of that. And sexuality education should help to create that confidence and that knowledge. And I think there's another question in the list about helplines. I think helplines are an extremely important thing to have in every country and for a wide range of sexual and reproductive health and rights issues. They make a major difference. And because in the end, the way that change happens is that you get a level of support and understanding across the population that starts to make a difference. And it has to reach a certain level where change can be made to happen. So that's a long-term answer to the question. Thanks.
Thank you, Marsh. We have one more question.
Okay.
This question is for Aisha and Camila. Has social media changed the landscape for advocating for abortion? How can we maximize this? What are our limitations?
Thank you, Adira, for the question. So I would say abortion is a very sensitive topic, and not everybody would like to, go on social media and talk about it, because everybody has their own perspective about abortion. So if I tell that tomorrow Indian influencers will start talking about abortion, that is wrong. We can't expect them, because all the influencers come with their own baggages about abortion. So right now, there are few organizations like Hidden Pockets Collective who are trying to use the information of abortion and trying to put it in mainstream. And even we are very careful what words are we using and how we are showing this information there. And when we talk about limitation, we have to be very careful in social media what you're putting there, because we have to know our audience. As one of the end users, when I see information, I'm very quick, because there's a lot of things to imagine. Instagram, there's a lot of things to watch there. So I won't spend 1 hour watching one post. I'll just spend 5 seconds. So I would say this is a very good space, but we have to be very careful what we are putting about safe abortion, because it's a very, very sensitive topic. And we need to put correct information also. Slight or wrong information there can just bring all your efforts down.
No sé si podría responder. En el caso de Argentina, la comunicación masiva fue lo que nos permitió transformarlo en ley. Con lo que pasó, que les decía hace un instante de la campaña de Ni Una Menos en el año 2015, que fue la primer movilización masiva que tuvimos para poner en tela de discusión en todos los ámbitos de la vida social los temas sobre feminismo y violencia de género. Con aborto pasó lo mismo. Cuando decimos que la juventud ganó la batalla cultural en la calle, ganó también ganó la batalla cultural, y eso implicaba también ganar en los espacios donde estaban las redes sociales. Las convocatorias se basaban en las convocatorias de redes sociales, fueron convocatorias que se basaron en Twitter, en Instagram, en Facebook en algunos casos, utilizando las redes sociales como medios de difusión y formas de convocar a los diferentes rangos etarios que componían nuestra sociedad y las mujeres y las disidencias y las personas que formaban parte de nuestra militancia. Pero estoy segura que las redes sociales para el aborto en Argentina, para transformar el aborto en Argentina, fueron una gran herramienta, fueron muy, muy útiles.
Adra, I also wanted to add that in our experience, we have noticed also when you put anything related to abortion on social media, somewhere the promotion by the platform itself is really low. I mean, sometimes it's taken off from the social media platform altogether. So that's why I said we have to be creative when we are putting something related to something which is very sensitive topic, how to be creative so that even the platform people should not delete that information because it's a very important information. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Aisha and Camila. I saw Bing raising hands. Did you put it in the chat, Bing, or do you want to speak?
Oh, yeah, sorry. Yeah, it was about earlier when we were talking about the parental consent. And I was thinking that if you look at how the Philippines is actually now in the crisis of having a national emergency for teenage pregnancy, that actually really means that parental consent is not, it's actually not good, but just really harming young people and adolescents, because that is the evidence. Teenage pregnancy is ever rising, but then we do have parental consent to access SRH services and information. And I'm also wanting to have a rejoinder around the social media. And one of the things that we also, are doing at WGNR is really being very, very active in the online spaces, in the virtual spaces. And we also face a lot of oppositions already. And we also, not only by the religious oppositions, but within the platform itself. Facebook have been tagged us over and over for having violated the community that community regulation that they are putting out on Facebook. So they took down our posts so many times. Our YouTube channel have been taken down because we uploaded we have an album, a music hip hop album on abortion situation and experiences of women in the Philippines, and that has been put out on on YouTube, and then YouTube took it down because there was a mass report around that. So those are the things that we are also, facing. Apart from, of course, we're seeing that this is a very effective platform, a tool for our advocacy, but at the same time, it can also be very, very limiting because Facebook and YouTube, Instagram also have their regulations that is very, very fragile when there is a mass report. And in this context where there are a lot of, oppositions, they can actually take down your posts or even your channel for that matter.
Thank you, Bing. Even at Hidden Pockets Collective, we have had the similar experiences with social media taking down posts related to adolescent sexuality, abortion, saying we violated community guidelines. Aisha raised hand. Yes, Aisha.
Yeah, Adra, I just wanted to answer that advocating against the parental consent. I find this question really difficult because the country I come from, women who are married, who are 50 years also need consent from parents to do anything. I mean, it's not about 16, 17. I mean, when we are 70 also, if our parents are there, we would be still asking them their choices and not our own. So it's a very difficult topic. And I remember we had a workshop for under 18 on menstruation, and the mothers were sitting with the girls. So it was so difficult to talk to the girls about contraceptives or anything, because the mothers are also sitting. But I think how we can work is when we know mothers or parents are sitting with children to mold and tweak our content in such a way that we are, along with the adolescent, we are also educating the parents somehow. Because in India, when we are talking to children, we are having workshop with the children online, parents would be there. And in a situation, in a social construct where a woman does not have any rights to consent till she's, I mean, I think till 60 or 70. I don't think so after 70 also. So we have to figure out, how to do it. And I found this question really difficult, and I was thinking through, like, what can we do?
Thanks for adding that, Aisha. So far, this many questions we have got, and we answered all the questions. If anyone have any more questions, please raise your hand or ask to unmute. We will answer the question. We will give a minute if anybody want to ask question.
Yo sí quiero hacer una aclaración porque leí un comentario en el chat sobre que la lucha por aborto en Argentina llevó 15 años y que por ahí en UK ha sido más larga. En realidad no es que no llevó 15 años, seguramente no llevó muchos más años. Lo que yo trataba de expresar es que la campaña nacional por el derecho al aborto legal, seguro y gratuito, que fue un espacio integral, interpartidario, intergeneracional, donde confluyeron diferentes partidos políticos, partidos que estaban representados en el Congreso argentino y partidos que no, o espacios colectivos feministas que se autoconvocaron. La campaña era eso, era esa convergencia de diferentes fuerzas políticas, partidarias, sociales, territoriales, pero seguramente la lucha por el aborto legal es más larga en Argentina. No me atrevería a fecharla, realmente no me atrevería, pero es más larga.
Thank you, Camilla. I think Marge put a comment on the chat box. Marge, do you want to say that, and then we can close the discussion? Marge, you are on mute.
Sorry. What do you mean, the comment about a critical mass of support?
Yes.
Yes. No, let me first just react to Camilla, because I was the one who said it took 15 years. I meant it took 15 years till the movement began and started the fight. Obviously, it started long before that. And if you look at the United Kingdom, for example, it started in the 19th century because they had to make contraception legal. Contraception was also illegal. And then they took up abortion, and there was a lot of conflict between the two movements, whether contraception was okay, whether also abortion was okay. And so we had these two groups that were supposedly, quote, pro-choice, who were fighting each other whether they should work together or not. And then we had two world wars that got in the way and stopped any campaigning. And so we didn't get our first decent law on abortion until 1967. So, these things, really, one has to have a long-term view on these things. And the more controlling a society is of women and children, I think the longer that will take. And so it becomes a battle to try and free ourselves from the things that bind us. And when I tried to say, what I wanted to add to what I said earlier is that achieving a critical mass of support. That was the first lesson I got when I joined the abortion rights movement in London, that you have to achieve a critical mass of support before you can hope for change to happen, because you need to know that you have the country, the people in the country behind you, really. You can measure that, but as a movement and as activist groups, we really have to make sure that we are going for that support. And that support, above all, in my experience, when it comes to abortion, is the support of everybody who's ever experienced an unwanted pregnancy, first and foremost, and then everybody else behind that. Thank you.
Thank you, Marge. So that now we don't have any more questions and we are a little behind on time. So I'm ending the webinar. Thank you so much for the questions, the discussions, and I hope this session was helpful. We learned a lot. Thanks to all the amazing panelists for sharing your experiences and your knowledge with us. A recorded version of this webinar will be available and we will be emailing it to you. You can also watch the webinar on YouTube on our YouTube channel. Thank you, everyone. We are stopping the recording.